Our next conversation today is with Deborah Flora. She's one of 6 Republicans running for Colorado's 4th Congressional District, safest Republican seat in Colorado's congressional delegation. And this is the 4th of 4 interviews with those candidates. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Great to be here.
I should acknowledge the 2 folks who declined to come in for an interview were Congresswoman Lauren Boebert and Jerry Sonnenberg. You're here. Let's talk.
Okay.
Today, Senate Republicans in Washington blocked an effort by Democrats to protect access to IVF nationwide. Should states be able to ban in vitro fertilization?
Well, I do believe it is a states' right issue, but I have to say, Kyle, this hits me very personally. My husband and I were told that we wouldn't ever be able to have our own children. And that is something I know many families who go through that and the heartache that that is and how much science has helped with that. Now, we ended up having our own children. We've got 2 beautiful children who are 19 and 20 years old, and I'm so grateful for that. So I think that when we look at this issue, we have to look at it from every single standpoint. What is the real goal here? The real goal is to have parents be able to have the children that they long for. If that didn't turn out for us, we would have looked into adopting, but we're grateful that we did have that opportunity.
I want to make sure that I fully understand your answer. So your belief is that states should have the ability to ban IVF, but you don't think that they should? You
know, I think it's something where that is, let me put it this way. There are safeguards around concerns, let's say, that people have in the life side of things. Let's say there are 20, embryos or whatever that's right. There are certain ways to go about that. My husband and I made ethical decisions personally when we pursued this pathway. And I do think it is more of a personal thing. I certainly do not think that the Senate should be blocking this or in any way weighing in on this. This is a very personal situation.
And to that end, do you think that there's a role for state governments in weighing in on what couples do with their embryos?
I think that that's something where there are wonderful options for those who this is a concern for, which it was for my husband and I. We want to look at this from an ethical standpoint. I think it's a very personal decision, and it's one I'm very grateful that we had the opportunity to pursue ourselves.
I'm not sure if I heard an answer to whether the state government has a role in telling people what to do with embryos.
I don't believe so. Okay. I think the reality is there are many things that should be left to a larger conversation in our culture, and there's a place for that. There's a place to talk about how do you meet the needs of couples that are longing to have a child, along with the ethical side of what happens. And there's a lot of great organizations that are there. I would like to see so many of these things not always be legislated and politicized, but instead be in the conversation amongst a culture of what is the best option, what is the most humane option. There's a lot of options out there.
So right now, President Biden is saying that if Democrats have a majority in Congress, he would like to codify Roe versus Wade and return it to a national standard. Obviously, you have Donald Trump saying that he's comfortable with a state-by-state situation like we have now that Roe has been overturned. Would you support the idea of a national abortion ban?
It's a term I've never used, and the reason why is because I believe there is a place for national, federal pro-life legislation. We've seen things like the Born Alive Act. I think every single person can agree a child that survives an abortion deserves humane care. I would be for something like that on a national level because I don't think that that's something should be allowed in our culture in any state. There's also the partial birth abortion ban that was signed into law at the federal level. That's also a very humane policy. And we have more extreme states like Colorado that really has codified in many ways abortion under any circumstance at any point in time. I think there's a place for common sense limitations on a federal level, but I've never said a federal abortion ban. That's not what I'm standing for.
So in fact, you would not support one. It's not just that you don't talk about it, but you would not support a national abortion ban.
That's correct. I think there are more common sense places that we can come together in legislation, but I don't think that that is something that I'd be fighting for.
Can I ask you a question? So in Colorado, only 1% of all abortions here, like 100 some, happen 28 weeks or later.
Yes.
So I hear you and other pro-life conservatives focus so much on the idea of late-term abortions, you call them partial birth abortions, that kind of thing. We're talking about just like a very tiny sliver. You don't dispute that, right?
No, it's a small amount, but I think a culture and a society is very much judged by what we allow. And even if it's a small percentage, the vast majority of people I speak to, Democrats as well, understand that, up until the moment of birth is something that nobody should be standing for. So I think it's important. It's an important distinction because we have to come together as a culture and discuss what is the value of life? What do we stand for? You could have, abuse of someone and it's one person, but if we don't stand against that, that says something about us as a culture. So I do believe, even if it's small, it's an important thing to stand against.
I have a yes or no question to kind of set up this next topic. Do you believe that the majority of GOP primary voters in the 4th Congressional District oppose the re-election of Congresswoman Lauren Boebert? Do you think there's a majority that does not want to see her elected?
I do. And even the polls do show that.
Okay, and polls have shown that. I was just curious if that was your opinion
And
as well.
by the way, my experience talking to voters all over this district have verified that even more so than what the polls are showing.
So you've said that you think that Boebert could lose this safe seat to a Democrat, just like she nearly lost her last safe seat to a Democrat before she moved. You also know that her greatest advantage, and she has a couple of them, right? She's got near universal name ID, she's got a huge cash advantage, but her greatest advantage is that there are 5 of you running against her to split the anti-Boebert vote. If she is reelected to Congress, or even worse for Republicans, if she gets the nomination then loses, why are you and the 5 others not personally responsible for the fact that you couldn't figure out one person to run against her head-to-head and possibly beat her?
It's a great question, and I do think it's a concern of many people because there are the majority of people in this district, as you talked about, don't want Lauren Boebert as a representative. They don't want someone jumping from CD3, the other side of the state, to a place she's never lived or worked in before just to stay in her position. That's not representative government. And so the reality is what we've seen around my campaign, because that's the only thing that I can speak to about this, we've seen a lot of coalescing. It's one of the reasons why the Gazette endorsed me. They endorsed Lauren Boebert before. They endorsed me this time and signaled that I was pretty much, the new face of the Republican Party, someone that could advance bold ideas. We also had 2 other congressional candidates in CD4. When they ended their campaigns, they endorsed me and came around me, trying to signal to the others, it's time to coalesce, because we all want what is best for this seat. I'm proud also, by the way, that having lived, worked, and stood alongside my neighbors in CD4 for years, I've been endorsed by the Douglas County Sheriff, many mayors in the area, as well as a great number of state council members in the surrounding communities. They've all been trying to signal that it's time to coalesce, and I believe I'm the person that can win and keep this seat in the Republican column, particularly, Kyle, when you look at the fact that it's now redistricted to be 73% suburban, 49% unaffiliated. That's why I appreciate the support that I've received in this race.
So you think it's the other 4 people who are splitting the vote that are the problem?
Well, I think that there have been many cues along the way that have been missed of what this seat is now really, where there has been a consolidation, what people have been trying to signal to everyone to come around one another. And I've just had to be focused on that. The support that we received, like I said, from the Gazette and numerous endorsements, trying to signal that it was time to coalesce.
There are growing calls for the resignation of Colorado's Republican Party Chairman Dave Williams for a whole list of things, right? Using party resources to boost his own campaign over another Republican for Congress, having the party take sides in a number of Republican primaries, including endorsing Lauren Boebert in this one, most recently for anti-LGBTQ bigotry that he spread around the state, including a call to burn all pride flags. Do you think he should resign?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You just listed the chain of events. The role of the head of the Colorado GOP is, first of all, to help build the party, not tear it down, not divide it, not rend it asunder. And when you see the breaking of tradition of neutrality in these races, basically dictating to voters who they should select as though this small group of people, and let's be clear, it is not all Republicans. It's not even the Republican Party. It's a small group in leadership led by Dave Williams. And the last straw for me, and Kyle, I've spoken out about this because I'm a big tent Republican. I believe if we can communicate with our neighbors that our principles and our policies are the best thing to the issues that keep them up at night, we would be seeing our party turning around. When I was growing up, it was nearly 40%. We're down to 24%. But the last thing that he did with this hateful language against the LGBTQ community, treating everyone wholesale, that is unacceptable. What we stand for on the Republican platform and the Constitution is the dignity of every human being, the right of every person to live freely. That's why I'm so honored that Valdemar Archuleta, the president of the Log Cabin Republicans who you've had on your show, he endorsed me because we've been standing alongside one another, agreeing that there's a point where principle can be discussed, such as policies when it comes to letting kids just be kids in schools. But when it comes to standing up for the dignity of every human being, that's where I stand. I'm proud to stand with people like Valdemar.
About that big tent, how about LGBTQ Republicans? They should be in the tent?
Absolutely. Everyone's welcome in the tent.
How about anti-gay bigots? Are they welcome in the tent?
I kind of use this analogy. I'm a mom of teenagers, as you know. People can be allowed in the tent, but they are not allowed to bully other people. They're not allowed to create this division. And I would think that they would recognize that the principles of the big tent we're talking about does not jive with the behavior and the verbiage that they have been putting out there. So I think, what would basically be the principles? First of all, the tent poles would be in the Constitution, which stands for everyone's right to live free. And then the tenet there would be, you will stand for one another's right to live freely without vilifying one another.
The Colorado Republican Party recently called for parents to pull their kids out of all public schools, and that expands on a call that you made a couple years ago for parents to pull their children out of all public elementary and middle schools. Assuming that you're serious and that you didn't say it for shock value, what would actually happen if parents heeded your call and pulled all kids out of Colorado's public elementary and middle schools? What practically would happen?
Well, let me address the first part. So I stand by the principle behind this statement because I have been a passionate advocate for school choice and for parental rights. Sometimes when you're passionate, maybe you don't give the nuance to this statement. I look forward to adding that nuance right now. The principle behind it is this. I stand unequivocally for school choice, parental rights. What that means is that everyone should have another option. They should not only have one option, which is the public school system. I stand for the rights of parents who know their children better than anyone to say, maybe this school is not a fit for our values or academically. So I've always been an advocate, sat on numerous boards that stand for charter schools, for micro schools, for home schools, for private schools. That's where I'm, and as we've discussed, this is a very personal thing for us. Our daughter was diagnosed with autism. She was floundering in a public school. We had the option to move her to an alternative form of education. She's now a young adult who is prospering as an entrepreneur. Our son went to a public high school. I stand for the rights to choose that, but I want to make sure every parent has that same right. And ultimately, that would look like the money following the student, not the system, and allowing that those options to prevail for everyone.
But there's a pretty big gulf between I stand for school choice and you saying that public schools are a burning building, get our kids out.
I was talking about someone that had used that analogy because I just spoken to a mom who was so disturbed by the lack of transparency, by her child coming home and being distressed by what they were taught, and she didn't even know what that was going to be. So I said, if that's your situation, then that is not the right fit for you. Get your child out and find the right fit. That was the principle behind that comment. Because if that is your public school, you have the right then to pull your child. And you know who this benefits the most and why I'm proud of doing this work? Those children who are usually from underprivileged families, caught in failing schools, low academics because of their zip code, nobody should feel trapped. If it's not working for your child, you should be able to pull them out and put them somewhere where they will prosper.
Can I ask you a question? So you talk about a scenario where you don't want to see communities where the public school system is the only option for parents.
Yes, correct.
If the money follows the students, as you say, I could imagine a number of communities in Colorado in which a lot of parents would take their kids out of the public system, might move them into religious education. You'd have the money follow them into religious education?
It depends, yes, if that's the best choice for them and their family. And that means for everyone, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Jewish,
Sure.
Christian, whatever their belief system is. I believe fundamentally in the right of every parent to raise their child according to their values and to achieve the highest academic excellence they can, because that's really how children prosper.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, how do you then ensure that there is always a well-funded and functional public school system in a community in which a lot of the dollars then go into religious education?
Well, we're seeing something really great happening across the country, and I think people are realizing that the system isn't working the way it is right now for teachers or for students or for parents. And one of those is ESAs, Education Savings Accounts. And how that works is a portion of the tax dollars goes to the family, and then a portion stays with public schools. So people are still funding public schools, but they're not funding both if they choose to take their child somewhere else. So there will always be a place for that, and that system works beautifully. I'm excited to see how that transpires in this school choice movement.
Republicans right now, including in Colorado, based on polling, are split on the issue of election integrity. I mean, it's pretty 50-50 whether or not Republicans trust elections in Colorado. And one of the reasons is because so many false claims were made by prominent people, including you on your talk radio show. You helped promote the claim that Denver-based Dominion Voting Systems rigged the 2020 election against Donald Trump. You said, quote, "Our votes are counted in Spain and supposedly kept in Germany." So that's nonsense. Republican election clerks in Colorado have pleaded for the misinformation to stop. My question for you is, do you regret spreading election misinformation, and do you have a responsibility to repair some of that damage?
Here's what was happening in that moment. That was when the 2020 election was unfolding. And I had someone on my show who was talking about that, and I was talking about it in a hypothetical.
You had on Joel Oltmann, who has subsequently called for the killing of his opponents and so forth.
I had him on once, and I want to say that I 100% denounce that kind of violent and vitriolic verbiage. That's why he was only on my show once, before everybody realized the direction that he was going. So I stand firmly against that and had never had him on again. And what I've said since then is I do believe that the county clerks who are on the front line, they're the frontline workers, are the ones we need to trust in this. That was part of multiple conversations I had with people, including county clerks. I do believe, and I've said repeatedly, that our elections are free and fair. I have stood now for making sure that we have common sense support for those county clerks, such as photo ID and making sure that voter rolls are cleared. That's where I've said, when we were going through that transition, there was a lot of misinformation flying around, and I've been very clear from that point on.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, I mean, we're both people who talk with a microphone on for a living, or have at various times in our careers. Do you have regret about spreading the misinformation, and then do you have a responsibility to repair damage done?
I have, since then, when we've seen the full weight of what came forward, because we were in the middle of cases, we were in the middle of all this information coming out, I have said clearly that I would never have Joel Oltmann on again. I would never be a part of that. And I have since then talked about how much I do trust the county clerks. And all those conversations, that was just one interview. And then afterwards, I had county clerks on. I had many other folks who began to give the fuller picture. So I'm very proud of the fact that I have looked at this from many sides. And I've been standing very much for the county clerks who do the work, who have informed and continuing their voices on our free and fair elections.
One final topic. Among Donald Trump's many ideas, if he were returned to the White House, is a mass deportation unlike the United States has ever seen. He claims it would be deporting 17 million people here illegally. Certainly, it would appear to be 10 million or more. In Colorado, an estimate of 150 to 200,000 people. So we're talking about a government operation like nobody has ever seen. One of your opponents, Richard Holtorf, was on here, and he said that there is a way for the military to assist with what he described as a peaceful deportation of 10 million people. Just a yes or no question, then we can dig into details on this. Do you support the idea of a mass deportation of everyone who is in this country illegally?
I don't think that's where we are. We need to prioritize what we're looking at. And, you know, one of the things I think about this, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a more complex conversation about it, you know, simplistic bumper sticker lines like build the wall, deport them all, that Lauren Boebert shares, that's not what this complex, serious situation deserves. My focus is understanding what each division does and what their job is. When it comes to the military, their job is national security, outward facing towards our enemies outside our country. So why I would put them at the border, make sure we secure the border, because that's a national security issue. What I would stand for instance, in Douglas County or CD4, is making sure that those who are tasked legally with the law enforcement inside our borders, that they have the ability to do it. I was talking with the Douglas County.
I want to clarify here.
Yes.
That's the idea of local law enforcement working on deportation, which is what Donald Trump has said is his first preference. He wants to deputize local law enforcement to do deportations, which they currently don't assist with.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about federal law enforcement.
Understood.
So the reality is, I spoke recently with the Douglas County Sheriff, and I'm honored to have his endorsement because he knows that I've looked at this in a very detailed manner. Right now, what we need to do is empower our federal law enforcement. That's ICE, basically coordinating with the FBI and their Joint Terrorist Task Force. They did a great job just this past week of capturing 8 suspected terrorists working together. The problem we have in Colorado is this. There was a 2019 law that prohibits state and local law enforcement from working with federal law enforcement. When I talked to the Douglas County Sheriff and others, that's what they want. They want to have the handcuffs taken off so they can coordinate with ICE so ICE can do its job. That's where we need to start on this.
So you talk about a start, which essentially would be a return to the status quo of, say, like 10 years ago.
Right.
But what Trump is calling for is something very different, which is a mass removal of people from the country. Is that realistic? Is it moral?
I think it depends on the case. You know, I don't think I speak to so many great Coloradans and Americans. They understand. We're not talking about those who've been here for years, who grew up here, were brought here as children, and this is the only country that they know.
Trump is talking about them, as is Lauren Boebert. They are both saying deport them all. You're saying Coloradans are not talking.
Yes, and I'm not talking about that, which is really the difference here. What I'm talking about is starting with those who've come across in the last 3 years who we do not know who they are, that we can actually do pretty easily because they're recent arrivals. What we need to do is empower those who are already tasked with that job by law, ICE, to coordinate with FBI, to coordinate with local law enforcement to do their job. That's not happening right now, and has not been enough resources put towards that coordination. Then we can do what is best for the country, starting with those who've broken the laws, and then ICE is notified about that. Then moving to those who are here, like the 8 suspected terrorists. Then we move from that standpoint forward. But I don't believe that we are at a point where we're talking about, this mass deportation of military coming in or anything of that sort. I think we can empower the situation as it is supposed to be, like you said, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we didn't have this situation with nearly 10 million people coming across in the last 3 years. When we go back to that, we get back to being the country of law and order, and we secure the border and stop the incentives that lure desperate people here. That's how we begin to turn this around.
Deborah Flora, I appreciate you coming in and taking questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I really appreciate it.